Double-Edged Destiny, an alternative universe fanfiction of Fractures. Chapter 2, Waking Up. The time is unknown, and the setting is unknown. If you did not read the first chapter due to the content warning, this chapter starts with a mild summary of Chapter 1. The memories were still fresh in Ceris' nightmares. She felt her tormentors punching, kicking, and cutting her. The chains clamped around her arms and legs caused her limbs to burn with pain. Her right eye had swelled shut within her bruised face, and the pain of every injury, old and new, screamed in her nerves. The enemies replied to her pained cries for mercy with laughter, and she heard Naeus repeat his questions over and over again. "Where is the dragon tamer?" he yelled as he landed a blow on Ceres' face. "Where are the end crystals?" The nightmare shifted to another scene after Ceres heard these questions. She saw the faces of the Endermen who had been gathered to witness her execution. The psychological torture of hearing Naeus' shameful speech almost felt worse than the physical pain. "She failed to protect your home," the Nether King said in her horrifying dream. The sound of his blade coming towards Ceres' neck filled her ears, but the dream ended as soon as the weapon hit her. Ceres felt awake, but she refused to open her eyes. She despised her new reality as a prisoner in the overthrown End, and she wanted to stay asleep and in denial as long as possible. A ringing noise resonated in her ears, and her head hurt, adding to her wish to keep her eyes closed. She listened carefully to the captured world around her, trying to determine if Naeus was nearby. If her skeletal torturer was close, she would force herself to wake up fully. However, she heard no sound except birds chirping, so she felt safe staying asleep. Wait, birds? She thought. Am I not dead? Suddenly, she became more aware of her surroundings. There were no chains on her body. Instead, she felt something soft and warm around her. Although her eyes were closed, she detected more light invading this area than what she recalled in her prison cell. Her eyes flew open. The stone bricks formed the walls of the spacious room. The floor was constructed with black stone tiles, and endstone bricks outlined a large window on the right, which was covered by white curtains. The furniture in the room consisted of a bed, 2 nightstands, a wardrobe to the left of the window, a bookshelf opposite the wardrobe, and a dresser directly in front of the bed. Each piece of furniture was made of dark oak wood. A soft purple blanket covered Ceres, and 2 gray pillows supported her head. A door remained bolted shut in the left front corner of the room. Ceres stared at her environment in disbelief for a moment before screaming, convinced that this strange room must be a hallucination. She tried to escape the bed, but every pixel of her body hurt too much to move well, and arcane tethers trapped her. She continued to scream in fear and pain while flashing around, trying to free herself. However, the noise of an ender creature teleporting into the room froze her. "You're finally awake," a deep, familiar voice said. "Oh, by the way, I noticed you got taller." The voice made Ceres feel even more terrified. It came from her left side, and slowly, she turned her head to find its source. An ender gorf sat on the table. She breathed heavily, trying to think clearly enough to figure out her situation. "Gorfs do not speak, Ceres," she told herself. "But I'm supposed to be dead. What is happening?" Her confused head struggled to determine reality. Nothing made sense to her right now. Suddenly, the gorf glowed white. It morphed into the shape of a person sitting on the bedside table. In a flash, his features became clear, and Ceres immediately recognized the person before her. Lance, a former Ender Lord, who had been banished over 150 years ago. Terror filled her heart as she realized that her old enemy had taken her hostage. She vibrated with fear and screamed yet again. She squirmed her way to the side of the bed, trying to escape the ties trapping her. Lance teleported from his spot to the other side of the bed. "Hey, hey, hey," he said in a steady voice. "Stop screaming." He put a hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her. The branding on her arm radiated with excruciating pain once more as Lance touched it. His hand almost felt like the branding iron that Naeus had used to mark her. She quickly tore herself away from him, causing the tethers to rub the burns and stab wounds on her torso. Fortunately for her captor, Ceris quit screaming. Instead, now she cried. Many questions raced around her mind, but she could not focus on any of them. Her confusion was too powerful. "Sorry, I forgot that was there." Great, Lance said to himself. His voice carried worry. Now she's crying. What do I do? What do I do? Last time I dealt with someone crying, it was my child, but this is very different. He scanned the room in a panic while rambling on about something. He left her side and darted to the wardrobe. He threw open the doors, but quickly left to search the rest of the room for something, leaving the wardrobe open. Ceris could not focus on Lance's rambling. In fact, she could hardly focus on her own thoughts still. How long has it been since I died? Where exactly am I? How am I alive? What does Lance want with me? Is any of this real? These questions, her pain, her confusion, Lance's ramblings, and her shattered mental state made her feel dizzy. Her head hurt, especially from the sound of her greatest enemy furiously searching the room. "Lance! What is going on?" she yelled, having finally chosen the first question to ask. Lance whirled around, surprised by her sudden anger. He dropped the box of tissues he had retrieved a moment ago. "Well, how am I alive?" Lance shrugged. "Necromancy. Lots of it. I learned it from my pirate ex-girlfriend. Remember her? Also a totem of undying." He picked up the box of tissues and returned to Ceres. "I heard about what happened to the End, so I went to the End 3 days ago to find you. Any wound on your body that could be fatal is healed, but even healing magic and necromancy have their limits. Most of your injuries are still there, but I bandaged them. Also, you're undead now." He held out the box of tissues for her. Ceres stared at him in confusion and anger. "Are you an idiot?" "What?" "I can't grab those. You tied me up. Why am I tied up?" Ceres was still confused, but at least now she had an answer explaining her sudden return to life and presence in Lance's home. Her brain fog began to clear, allowing her to focus on which question she needed to ask first. "I swear," the mage said, as he held up his hands defensively, "I'm not trying to hold you captive or anything. I just did that so you wouldn't fall off the bed and hurt yourself more. I guess now that you're awake, I'll free you." He waved his hand, dissolving the tethers holding Ceres in place. He watched as she slowly sat up, gritting her teeth as she struggled to rise. He patted her on the head, making her scowl. "So, are you hungry?" "No," Ceres lied. Although her stomach begged for food, she could not trust Lance. She strongly suspected that he wanted to torture and kill her too, meaning any food he gave her could be poisoned. "That's a lie. I'll be right back." Lance disappeared from the room and teleported back after a minute. In his hands he held a tray with bread and a cup of something hot. He gently set the tray on her lap, but she made no effort to pick up the food. Instead, she stared at it in disgust before giving him the same look. He waited a moment longer to see if she ate her meal, but he found himself locked in a stare-off with her. Finally, he picked up the piece of bread and repeatedly nudged her face with it. "Come on, I know you're hungry. It's bread and chorus tea. They're good for you." "Gah!" Ceres yelled. Lance's poking hurt the bruises on her face a bit, but these actions irritated her more than anything. "I don't want your stupid food. I don't want to be near you, and I don't want to even be here." If her face were not purple, it would be glowing red with anger. Despite not knowing much about her current situation, she was sure of one thing. She did not want to be alive right now. Lance dropped the piece of bread mid-poke, surprised by her words. He sighed, took a step away from her, and folded his arms over his chest. "You could at least be grateful that I saved your life. You wouldn't be alive if it weren't for me." His voice had a trace of agitation. "That's the problem," Ceres said. If she had enough strength, she would get out of her bed and punch Lance in the face. The more awake and alert she grew, the more she hated her situation. The destruction of her home and the death of most of her loved ones was still a fresh wound in her mind. She knew she did not deserve to be alive, especially not in a safe place where she could heal from her wounds. Naeus's words rang in her head still, constantly repeating themselves. She failed to protect your home. She failed to protect your home. Lance raised an eyebrow. You think it's a problem that I cared enough to save your life? Are you that stupid? Now Ceris really wanted to punch him. She was tempted to call upon all her remaining physical strength and make his face look like hers, even if the physical exertion or an angry reaction from Lance killed her again. She breathed heavily in anger, trying to form the right response. Lance calling her stupid now joined the constant loop of her killer's words in her brain. This only caused her anger to grow. You didn't just lose everything you loved! You traded that out years ago for selfish gain. I watched Vortis die. I saw Zeg barely escape, and I know he's dead already. I watched countless people die. I heard the survivors' tortured screams. I went through a nightmare being ripped apart and questioned. And now, my allies and my best friend are doomed. Do you really think I want to be alive right after everything? Why should I be the one to live? I was to clean it now. I failed. Ceris slumped down in the bed. Admitting her failure out loud drained her energy even more. I failed, she mumbled through fresh tears. She turned her head away from Lance, not wanting to see him or let him witness her tears. She tried to keep herself quiet and finished crying as soon as she could, but her body protested this wish by breaking into loud sobs yet again. Her stomach began to feel sick, and her tears quickly soaked her face. Lance grew silent. He nervously rubbed his left arm with his right hand and turned his face away from her too. Her words seemed to have had some effect on him. Ceris, he began slowly, after she had cried for a few minutes. Just leave me to die, Ceris replied weakly. Why do you even want me alive when you tried to kill me long ago? Her voice could barely be heard, and several body-shaking sobs interrupted her words. Because I... He struggled to construct his response. I have my reasons. Ceris, people can change. I can't leave you to die. Trust me, once you feel a bit better, you'll be glad you're alive. I will, however, leave you alone for now. Just eat your lunch, please. He picked up the bread again, which had fallen onto her instead of the plate. This time, however, he did not poke her in the face with it, but set it back on the plate for her to eat. He smiled sadly at her before removing himself from the room. The following silence in the room gave Ceris a bit of peace, although the voices were still stuck in her head. She resigned herself to stare at the wall for a while, sobbing and trying to find the never-ending loop of insults resonating throughout her brain. After half an hour, she grabbed the bread and inspected it. The item did not look poisoned. She sniffed it. Although she did not often eat overworld food, it smelled fine. Lance did seem somewhat trustworthy, she muttered as she mentally declared the food as safe to eat. She took a small nibble. The bread had grown cold over time, but it tasted good. Her empty stomach demanded more as soon as she took the first bite. Before long, she finished her bread, leaving her mouth dry. She cautiously examined the contents of her cup. Lance had said that it was chorus tea, a common recipe in the End that did not require water. It smelled like traditional chorus tea as well. She sipped it, pleased with its taste. Ceris finished a cup in 2 minutes, gaining a little physical strength from her meal. Mentally, however, Ceris still felt horrible. The events of the previous days kept replaying in her mind, reminding her that she should not be alive. Her failure and an agonizing mental pain filled her mind. As the queen, she should have died and remained dead trying to protect her home. Being alive highlighted her failure. She wanted to cry more, but she had no tears left. She resumed her staring at the wall, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her grief. Depression cast a dark cloud over her soul. She closed her eyes, longing to fall asleep and find this whole experience was a strange, post-death dream. Soon, sleep came. The time is 2 hours later. Ceris woke up again. She felt something soft and comfortable around her body instead of the painful metal chains. With her eyes still closed, she groaned. Her encounter with Lance in his home had not been a dream. Being alive was still a thing to be despised, especially since she was now with Lance. Her eyes flew open when she felt something pat her head. She squinted her eyes at the light. "You're awake again!" Lance was standing next to her, holding a cup of tea in his right hand while patting her head with the left hand. "Want some more tea? I noticed you actually finished your lunch, so I figured you might want something else by now." "Ow!" Ceris groaned. She pushed herself into a sitting position slowly, hissing in pain as she rose. She scanned the room. Instead of being in a bedroom, she was now in a living room on a couch. "You moved me?" Lance sat next to her and put his arm across her shoulders. "Yep, you can't just stay in one room all depressed and lonely." His hand brushed the branding on her shoulder. "Ow! Stop touching me!" As soon as Ceris said this, Lance moved his hand away. Sorry, I forgot. I wanted to give you a little hug, but everything on you is hurt," Lance said. Genuine remorse characterized his voice. He now held out the cup of tea for her to take. "Just don't touch me at all, ever," she muttered. Ceris did not want to accept the cup of tea again, or his kindness due to the history they unfortunately shared. She closed her eyes, hoping to fall back to sleep. However, Lance tried pushing the cup into her hands. Ceris ignored him, hoping to be left alone once more. However, Lance did not give up. Finally, she simply accepted the drink. "Thanks," she muttered before taking a sip. This tea was hot since it was fresh. Lance smiled, pleased that Ceris had taken the tea. He sat with her in silence while she slowly sipped on the drink. "So," he said, after she had finished half of her cup, "it's been a long time since we saw each other. Mind telling me what has happened since then? I'd like to know what caused those nether primitives to attack like that." Ceris instantly felt threatened by the subject. It not only reminded her of the violent assault on her home and the worst experiences of her life, but also implied that Lance wanted information. "No," she said, ending the topic with her tone of voice. She refused to share any information with her enemy. Lance sighed in frustration. "Fine." Ceris half expected Lance to send her back to the bedroom for her refusal to speak, but he surprised her by staying silent. She stared into her cup, avoiding even glancing at the enemy whom insisted on sitting next to her. Although she did not want to share recent events with him, his question caused the memories to pour back into her mind. This time, however, the flashbacks began with good memories. She took another sip of her tea and let the past take over. The end.